So aging actually has been worked on for about 5,000 years or more. And just in the last 20 years, we've come up with a set of hallmarks of aging. There are about 8 of them. And I think many of your viewers will know that there's telomere attrition, the ends of chromosomes get shorter, mitochondria, the power packs, we run out of energy as we get older. There's a list, a long laundry list. And most of the people in my field have said, okay, we've figured out aging. We've got this list, we put it in a nice pie chart, and that's it. But what I'm saying is that why does all that stuff happen? It's not enough just to tick off what happens. You have to understand, is there an upstream cause of all of that? And so in my book, and in scientific papers we are now putting out for the scientific community to read as well, what we think is going on is that our bodies are losing essential information as we get older that drives many, if not all, of those hallmarks that we know exist. There's really just 2 main types of information in our body that we get from our parents. The first is genetic. We all know about DNA and the 4 letters, A, T, C, G. It's a long molecule in the cell, and it's a string of letters. That's digital. That's like the music that's on a DVD, those things we used to use to store movies. But there's another level of information that's above that in cells, which is the reader of the information. That's called the epigenome. And that really is different because it's analog information, in the same way that records and cassette tapes. They sucked. They were terrible at storing information. But the problem is we have an analog version of information, the epigenome, which controls which genes in the string of DNA are turned on and off. The epigenome is the structure of how the DNA is organized. So DNA isn't just flailing around like a string. It's actually packaged up around proteins we call histones. And it's like if you spool your hose in the garden, you loop it around and then you can put those loops into bigger structures. Then you get a chromosome which you can see. Any high school student can see under a microscope. That chromatin structure, as we call it, is the epigenome. And so when the hose is looped tightly and spooled up, that's stopping genes from being read. So genes are off when they're compacted, but also if the cell needs to read certain genes, and a nerve cell needs to read the nerve cell genes, and the liver cell needs to read specifically the liver cell genes. And so they open those ones up, and now the cell can get access and read those. That's an analog system because it's varying all the time. It changes when you wake up, what you eat. You know, when we're born, we're 26 billion cells. Each one of those cells knows what it is and what it has to be 80 years later, it and its descendants. And over time, what I'm saying is aging is caused because cells lose their packaging, and then eventually cells lose their identity. Disease ensues, cells check out, they become zombie-like, and then
senescence, right?
Senescence, and then our organs fail, and we die. But until recently, we had no idea why that was happening.
And so, why is it happening?
Well, so the packaging's the really important part, because much like the software runs the code, the epigenome controls which genes are on and off. And if you stress the system, and by that I mean biological stress, and the biggest stress you can cause to a cell is to break its chromosome, because it's going to die if it doesn't fix it, or worse, for the body, you get a tumor. So the cell has to hunker down, stop dividing, arrest just about everything it's doing, and then try to repair that broken DNA. But in doing so, it has to do 2 things. First of all, it has to take proteins from somewhere else that are doing a good job keeping the cell from functioning, or making sure the cell's functioning correctly. And those proteins are used by the cell to repair the DNA that's broken. But also what's happening at the break is that that's all opening up as well, because you remember, if you break a DNA and it's spooled up, you can't fix it, you can't glue it back together unless you unpack it, stick it back together, and then you've got to repack it. So this movement of proteins and the unpacking, repacking of the DNA, I believe, leads to cells losing that original youthful, what we call a gene expression pattern of how the genes are turned on and off. And nerve cells, as they get older, lose their ability to stay nerve cells, and liver cells lose their identity as liver cells. It's super exciting when you realize that proteins aren't just blobs or powders in the cell. They're actually little machines, like Pac-Man, that go around and they can change the function of other things. They can package the DNA. And what they do is they create chemical reactions that normally would take 1 billion years to happen. This is what an enzyme does. It accelerates reactions. And so we've got about 20,000 different types of enzymes in the body, and they do different things. But what we've discovered over the last 20 years is there are certain types of enzymes that help package the DNA and help with the DNA repair. These are the ones that are doing the ping pong game. And without those, we're screwed. We basically will age more rapidly. Conversely, what's really exciting is we've discovered that you can make them more active to make sure the DNA is packaged correctly and the repair is very efficient. And there are ways you can do that: exercise, dieting, being hungry. They allow these enzymes that control our body and make us healthier. They make those enzymes much more active. So instead of a Pac-Man doing this, you exercise, you diet, take a molecule that we work on, and it'll go around and fix everything much more efficiently and keep you younger for longer, we think. I think a good example for at least the enzymes that we work on, called sirtuins, that protect the body, they're like a little tiny pair of scissors. They clip off chemicals called acetyls. And in doing so, when they clip off the acetyls off those packaging proteins, the DNA gets more compact. And that's called gene silencing. And over time, as we get older and through this DNA damage process, the sirtuins get inactive, they're distracted by DNA repair, and the packaging of that DNA, that hose spooling, starts to loosen. And now genes that have no business being on in the brain come on, and partly I believe that's why we have these diseases of the brain. Well, so I've been studying these enzymes, the sirtuins. We have 7 in our bodies. I've been studying them for about 25 years. And what we've learned is that they respond to the cellular environment. There's a chemical that they require for gas, think of them as the fuel, called NAD. And there's another molecule that is like the accelerator on the enzymes that makes them go even faster, and that's one of them is called resveratrol, which we discovered years ago from red wine. And together they actually do really great things on these enzymes and make them keep the body younger, at least. For 25 years we've been studying mostly animals, and even little fungi, yeast cells. And what we've learned from those studies is that these are largely involved in responding to when organisms are under threat of survival. So how do you make the body feel like it's under threat? Adversity. So one is run a lot, or at least become out of breath. A few times a week, your body will say, "Oh man, we had to outpace one of those saber-toothed cats again. Got to build up the body." The other is to be hungry, either a couple of times a week or every day, skip a meal or two. And then your body will turn on these sirtuins, make more of that fuel, NAD, for the enzymes. And we think that's what's in part responsible for the health benefits of those lifestyle choices. Well, there are different levels to resetting aging. There are 3 levels that we know of. The first is pretty easy to reset or to manipulate. These are the proteins that turn genes on and off very quickly. We call them transcription factors. And they basically read a gene and make a protein. That's what they do. That's level 1. That's easy. Go a little bit hungry, that'll change. Level 2 is a little bit harder. The level 2 is not just changing which genes are quickly turned on and off, but actually silencing genes for a long time. And this is where my enzymes that we work on, the sirtuins, come into play. Let's go back to the Pac-Man. They clip off acetyls off these packing proteins. You spool up the hose, and it becomes locked in. That gene gets silenced for a long time. So to do that, you can exercise, you can diet, but you also, I think, you need a little bit of help as well. What gets really interesting, and this is something most scientists don't even know about yet, is level 3, the deep layer of aging. There's actually a DNA clock that tells our bodies how old we are. I could take your blood and read it, and I could tell you roughly when you're going to die.